If you're watching films and TV series in original version to improve your English, this is the perfect podcast episode for you. My special guest this week is Cara from Leo Listening, and she's going to give you some tips and advice on how to use video to improve your English. Welcome to Aprender Inglés with Cara and Craig. Hello and welcome to the podcast that will help you take your English to the next level. If you're a new listener, you're very, very welcome. There is usually a co-host on this show, my good friend Reza, but he's not here with me today. He will be back next week. Cara Leopold is my guest today. She's an online teacher, and you can find her and her movie club at leolistening.com. Cara is originally from the UK and she currently lives in France. Now, Cara and I talk about how to improve your listening skills with movies and TV series, and she has lots of great advice for you on how you can make the most of video content to take your English to the next level. By the way, if you want to take your speaking fluency to the next level, there are still some places left on my next online conversation course. If you feel a bit shy and you hesitate a little when you speak English and you want to improve your fluency, come and join me in a small group of motivated students on Zoom, and we'll work together to improve your speaking, your pronunciation, and your vocabulary. Does that sound interesting? If it does, send me an email to Craig, C-R-A-I-G, @inglespodcast.com, and I'll give you more details about the next course. Now, please enjoy my conversation with Cara from Leo Listening. Cara, thank you very much for joining me on the podcast. It's lovely to meet you and to have you on the show. How are you?
Yeah, I'm pretty good. Thanks, Craig. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
You're very, very welcome. The first thing I'd like to ask you is what I ask people who come on who the audience isn't familiar with. Where's your accent from?
Oh, yeah, where would I say? So, yeah, I'm British, in case people hadn't noticed. Maybe they hadn't noticed, I don't know. I was born in Scotland and I lived in Scotland till I was 11, almost 12. And then after that, we moved to a city called Nottingham, which is in the Midlands, which, as you can guess, that's a region in the middle of the UK. Although technically the accent is northern in Nottingham in terms of some of the features. So like the big one is we say Bath and not Bath, like they do in the south of England.
I say
so
Bath.
Even you do.
I do. I say Bath. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So that's how you can tell kind of the region someone's from. So just to give like that example. So even though it's not technically in the north of England, people have the northern features in their accent. So I lived there, and then I lived there until I left for France, which is where I live now. So I left when I was 22. So I've actually lived in France since 2007. So I guess my accent is probably a bit of a mixture.
It's a lovely mixture, and I can hear some of your Scottish accent coming through. Which part of Scotland did you grow up in until you were
So we lived, well, like most Scottish people live in the sort of middle of Scotland. It's called the Central Belt. And we lived near a town called Stirling. So Stirling is kind of between Glasgow and Edinburgh. It's nicknamed the Gateway to the Highlands. So it's kind of the beginning of the Highlands of Scotland.
So it's quite a soft accent. It's lovely. Well, now that we've got your accent more or less placed in people's minds, Leo Listening, your website, I'd like to talk about that and about listening in general. Now, Cara, when people speak about listening, I get lots of questions from my students and they say, Craig, I need to improve my listening, which is a very general statement. What would you say is the difference between active listening and passive listening? And what should students be doing to improve their listening skills and understand more about what people are saying to them in English?
All right, that's a lot of questions. So let's go one step at a time. So yeah, well, I think probably most people are more familiar with what passive listening is because it's probably what they're doing, and I think it's also what people kind of do when they talk about listening practice. So passive listening is just listening to something, and you're not really doing anything in particular to try to understand it. You're just letting it wash over you, like the waves in the sea. So, and that also means it's usually associated with listening to something for pleasure. So, you just put on a podcast and you listen to it, or you put on an episode of a TV series and you listen to it, or you watch a movie or a YouTube video or whatever it is, and you're just listening, right? So that is what a lot of people do, and people expect it to help them improve, but it doesn't always work like that for reasons we'll get into. And then, so what I recommend is continuing obviously to listen. We need to listen a lot to our second, third, whatever language we're learning, but you also need to bring in some more active listening. So this is where you're making a bit of an effort. So, I mean, it could be something as simple as listening to a podcast and reading the transcript. And what's making it more active is the fact that you're linking the spoken versions of the words to their written form, and you're making that connection. And you're actually noticing what's being said, and you're not just kind of missing half of it. You're not just getting the gist, you're going for more detail. Or another thing you can do is, listen to short parts of the thing you're listening to. So maybe take 5 or 10 seconds, listen to that a few times and try writing it out, and then test yourself by checking with the transcript.
So that's like a dictation more.
Yeah, it's a dictation. But yeah, dictation, sometimes people think of school and like teachers sort of reading a passage from a book really slowly so that you can like work on your spelling. This is a little bit different because here we're working on what did you catch, how much did you catch, what did you miss, and more importantly, why did you miss or mishear things. So, it's obviously more active, it's more tiring, but it's also really beneficial to work like that. So I do that a lot with my students, and then that way it's not just, the English washes over you and maybe you catch a few new things. No, this way you can really learn new expressions in context because you're forced to really pay attention to them and catch them.
Yeah, that's really good advice, because I think students do listen very passively sometimes, thinking that will automatically improve their listening, and it does. But obviously, if you're more active, then you're going to focus more on the sounds. And I really like the fact that you mentioned read the text along with listening, because I want to ask you about something called shadowing. I don't know if you're familiar with shadowing. I've been experimenting with my students with that recently. And I took a very short piece of, could be film, in this case it was a video, it could be just audio, with the script, with the transcription, and get the students to, first of all, break it down and notice the weak forms, the linking, the way English kind of flows and connects, and then repeat it after the person, piece by piece, after the person speaking on the video, and then at the same time. So it's kind of mixing different skills. Obviously, it's the pronunciation, it's the listening. Like you said, you're reading and listening, and then it's speaking and pronunciation to get that fluency and get that more sort of native speaker sounding speech. Have you tried that with students?
Yeah, I've talked about it a little bit on my blog. I have a video of me doing it in Spanish, but I actually found it really hard in Spanish.
Why did you find it hard? Was it the pronunciation, or?
I think I chose something that was a bit fast for my level. So you do have to choose the material quite carefully because it's not really listen and repeat. It's following along at the same time. So that really forces you to adopt the same stress patterns as the speaker and, drop the same sounds or link the same sounds as they do. So it is really challenging. And yeah, I think it's almost better for listening than it is pronunciation, because sometimes some of the things native speakers do when they speak fast, like I wouldn't recommend learners to do, because they actually make words really unclear. So they're not always the best model actually for clear speech, because sometimes they just destroy words. And it's probably not that useful for you to pronounce that way if you're an English learner, because, I don't know, if you're talking to other English learners, at least they might not understand either. So,
Well, that's one of the things I was thinking of, because I'd like to do more of this. The students really enjoyed it. And I have never done this in class before, in a classroom. I'm doing this online with Zoom. And obviously, as a teacher, we drill, we say, repeat after me. Where were you born? Together, where were you born? And the students repeat. But this way, they can choose their favorite actor or actress. And I thought, well, I wonder who. So I made a list. What do you think of this list? I've got Geoffrey Rush, Colin Firth, Kate Blanchett, Helena Bonham Carter, Maggie Smith and Meryl Streep. All very clear speakers, I think.
Yeah, I was going to say they're all quite well-spoken people. Yeah, I do something a little bit similar after we've worked on dictations, which are usually lines from movies, then I kind of get the students to pronounce them the way the speaker does. But again, it is a pronunciation activity, but it's more like, again, to reinforce the listening part and trying to get it as close as possible to the original.
So do you focus on one sentence at a time, or one sort of movie quote at a time? Is that how you break it down?
Yeah, more like a line of dialogue. Or, I mean, I try and chop it up where it makes sense, like semantically. So in terms of me, I'm not going to stop halfway through a sentence. But yeah, usually lines of dialogue are quite good. I mean, it's also trying to choose. I mean, I think people might be surprised how short some of the lines are, but like native speakers pack a lot of words into, just a few seconds. So, and also you need something that's not too long to carry in memory. So yeah, I mean, it really is just a few, I would say no more than 10 seconds.
Yeah, definitely. Keep it short and sweet, and just repetition and focusing on those weak forms.
Exactly.
Apart from that, obviously that's a very good strategy for people who are studying by themselves, for self-study. What other ideas can you think of that learners can use by themselves, studying at home, to get the most out of film, video, TV series to improve their listening?
Okay, well, there's things that you can do to make it a bit easier. So, for example, if somebody says to you, oh, do you want to go and see, X movie that's on at the cinema at the moment? Like, even in your native language, you might be like, yeah, sure, let me like watch the trailer or get a bit of information about this film, right? So that can really help in English as well. It's just having a little bit of information before you start watching, especially with films, because they can be quite overwhelming. Like, if you don't know the story, or even like what the characters' names are or whatever, like it really just helps just to go on maybe the IMDb page. So that's the Internet Movie Database, and just have a look. Like, there's like a one-line summary of the plot, and then there's like a list of the cast, and then a trailer usually.
That's a good idea. I'll make sure to link to that in the show notes.
Yeah, it's a great resource, IMDb. Or also another thing you can do is, after you've watched the movie, to check that you've understood what happened. Usually on Wikipedia, there are very detailed plot summaries of films. Like, it tells you everything that happens. So avoid reading that before, but you can read that after. And there are also things like YouTube channels where they do recaps of films and they explain everything that happens. So that's a really good way to check, especially if you were a little unsure of why certain things happened in the movie. Those channels can be really helpful. So yeah, checking, kind of getting some information beforehand, and then also after the movie, just double checking you understood everything. And you can also do that kind of thing with podcasts. So if most podcasts have like a web page and they have show notes where there's again a summary of the episode. So you could either look at that before or look at it after. Before, to prepare yourself for some of the things you're going to hear about, or after, to check, did I actually catch the main points of this podcast, or did I completely miss the point?
And if you want to check to make sure you've understood the points that Cara's just said, go to inglespodcast.com/Cara, and you can read the show notes and a summary of Cara's answers to my questions.
perfect. Yeah, that's the sort of resource you need. Or like, I mean, again, it's expensive to produce, but like the best podcasts will also come with a transcript. And that is just an amazing resource to check, to get feedback. Like, did I actually understand this? Or did I completely miss the point? Like, it's always really good to have a way to check that. Because sometimes when you just listen passively, you just go, I didn't understand much. And then you just kind of move on to the next thing. And I think some of that comes from school, because I don't know about you, but at school, learning languages, you do comprehension tests and you have to pick like A, B, or C or whatever. And then you go through the answers and they tell you like, this is the right one, or true, false, this is the correct answer. But then you never go into like, well, why did you misunderstand, or why did you choose the wrong answer? Like, let's, look at the transcript of the recording. I never had that at school.
No, I didn't. We didn't have that. I learned French. Well, learned French. We had French. I didn't really learn much because
I attended lessons.
Yeah, I was there. And you're right. They don't give you the script. You don't get a chance to clarify or ask why you didn't understand. And going back to what you just said, I think people switch off, don't they? Either if they understand what they can hear, but it's really boring, your mind wanders, or as you've just said, you don't understand enough to follow the video or to follow the story or the plot. So then you switch off because you kind of give up. Your brain can't follow.
You give up. Yeah. No, it's not fun to listen. If something's too hard, it's not beneficial for your learning, because there's just nothing to like grab onto, and there's no opportunities for learning new things because there's too much unknown stuff.
Well, that brings up two questions, Cara, but the first one, let's take one at a time. And I've heard you answer this question. I'm sorry to bring it up again. You've said this on another podcast. But I've got to ask you, because all of my students who have problems with listening say this to me: subtitles or no subtitles? Now, the initial frustration of not understanding something in English really is tempting to put the subtitles on. Now, should they not do that? Should they put their native language as subtitles until they understand the plot and then rewatch it? What's your take on that?
Well, in terms of like the actual language of the subtitles, I would say use English rather than your own language. Although I know that's not always possible for some people, depending on whether or not their language has a different script. But if we're thinking here about like English and Spanish, I would use the English subtitles. And if you're at the level where that's too hard and you can only use the Spanish subtitles, probably movies aren't really a good choice for you at this stage, and there's probably other material that's better for you.
If they're watching in English with English subtitles to improve their listening, isn't there a tendency just to read? Because, sometimes you're watching somebody giving a PowerPoint presentation and they put lots of text up on a slide and then they start talking to you. Now, you can either read the text and understand it, or you can listen to the person speaking. It's really difficult to do both. So my question is, if they've got English subtitles, isn't there a tendency to just read them and block out the spoken English?
Yeah, no, definitely. And I've met people who've said to me, I understand everything on the subtitles, but if I take them away, I struggle to understand. So no, the answer is quite nuanced for the use of subtitles. So just to give you an example, so I have a movie club where we watch a movie each month, and my students have got quite a high level. So like minimum B2, but often like a lot higher, right? So their English is already very good. And, when they watch the film in the first week of the club, I would say almost everybody watches it with subtitles. Not necessarily everybody, but kind of the goal in that first week is just to watch the movie, enjoy the movie, follow the story, start developing some opinions about it. So it's more like an enjoyment phase. And then after, we work on clips from the movie.
Clips are short pieces of it, right?
So when we're in that stage, we're working on listening skills, pronunciation skills, speaking skills. So at that stage, they're using the clips without subtitles. And then we use the subtitles after to check their work and get feedback and everything. And I guess that there's an active and passive difference there. So maybe when you're in the more passive phase and you're just watching the movie for enjoyment, you could use the subtitles. And then when you're in the sort of active, I'm training my listening, I'm learning new vocabulary, I'm working on my speaking, all that phase is going to happen with the subtitles at some point, but usually later. A final tip as well, like, the subtitles, you can use them at different stages. You can use them before and after. And also, you don't have to use them all the time. So a really nice tip I got from a colleague who teaches Italian, she teaches English too, but mostly Italian, is she told her students to just experiment with turning the subtitles on and off. So, like, it doesn't have to be all or nothing, black and white. It's either 100% subtitles or 0% subtitles. It can be, let me just use them for 5 minutes and then let me turn them off for 5 minutes.
And I would guess that would be really useful if there was a word that kept coming up. You kept hearing the same word. For vocabulary notation, you'd write down the word, get the spelling right, say, oh, it's that word, check the meaning maybe. And then if you hear that again, then you know that word. So you'd list the vocabulary by using the subtitles on and off to notice the word.
Exactly, yeah, to catch words that keep coming up. Or if you get to a scene that's particularly difficult, that could be a moment where it's just like, okay, let me put them on. Let me make my life a bit easier. And then we can move on.
Got it.
Yeah. So it's really, you can be very flexible in the way that you use them. But I do believe you should use them at some point because, if you do a dictation, you need to check your work. How do you check your work? Well, if it's a movie or a TV series, you have this brilliant resource that is the subtitles, that is the written version of the entire movie or episode.
Good point.
So pretty cool.
Good advice. Let's talk genres or types of TV series and films. 2 questions, really. First of all, are there particular genres that you think are easier to follow than others? And secondly, what's your favorite?
Okay. So for the first question, yes, I do. It's hard to be very precise because even within a genre, there's so much variation, because I would say comedies can be easier to follow, although in some respects they can also be harder to follow. So the rule doesn't work every time. I mean, the thing that is probably a kind of better way to think is that a TV series is probably going to be easier to follow than a movie because the episodes are shorter and obviously there are multiple episodes and you get used to the way people speak, etc., etc. And I would say probably a sitcom, a situation comedy, those can be a really good type of TV series to get into, to get used to hearing fast speech, as opposed to, say, dramas where sometimes the dialogue can be so realistic sounding, it can be hard to get. Whereas sometimes in comedies, they make the joke really obvious because they want you to laugh. And yeah.
Yeah. Also, I would guess maybe that dramas and maybe things like spy thrillers would be more difficult for learners than action movies because they're not so visual. There's lots of dialogue.
Yeah, there's a lot of, their dialogue. I mean, I don't like action movies really for English learning because I don't think there's enough dialogue. And because I have a movie club, so we need movies we can discuss. Mm-hmm. so there has to be enough dialogue.
Yeah. Which building did he throw him off of? How many times did he shoot him?
I mean, we actually, that's the reason why we don't watch so many comedies as well, because sometimes comedies there's just not enough substance, kind of deep substance to talk about. But usually if it's a drama, there's a lot to discuss to do with the characters and why do they do the things they do and what are the themes and all this kind of stuff. So there's a lot of things to take into consideration. It kind of depends what you're doing. As a rule, though, I think if you're starting out with movies and TV series, find a sitcom or watch movies that you've already seen in your language. That's happened to us a few times in Movie Club. We've watched movies kind of from the 90s or the 2000s, and often the members of the club, they're like, oh yeah, I saw this at the cinema back in the day in Portuguese, or I've seen this on TV in Italian or whatever. Sometimes that makes it easier as well because you're familiar with the story and now you're just discovering it in English.
Yeah, good point. I've been asking my students and I get things like Grey's Anatomy, Downton Abbey they like, Friends is very popular, those kind of things. What's your favorite genre?
Oh yeah, you asked me that. Yeah, I forgot to answer that one. Oh my gosh. I think with movies it's hard. In terms of TV series, one that I've really been enjoying recently is a series called What We Do in the Shadows, and it's a comedy. It's also a mockumentary.
What's that?
It's a combination of mock and documentary. So it's like it's filmed in a documentary style, but it's not a real documentary because the people in this series are vampires. So obviously, I hate to tell you, but vampires are not real. And so obviously this series is a comedy, a mockumentary, and it's about vampires who live on Staten Island near New York.
So it's American accent then?
Well, actually, yes and no, because the vampires are all from Europe. Europe and I guess the Middle East. So because one of them is British, another one is supposed to be Greek, and the other one is from a place called El Canadar, which is like modern day Iran. So they all have very strange accents.
Sounds really weird. It sounds like a cross between The Walking Dead and The Office.
It kind of, yeah, that's actually not a bad description. And these vampires, they have a familiar. So that was a word I didn't know. A familiar is a human who like looks after a vampire, and like a kind of vampire butler or something.
Oh, in the same way that in Harry Potter, the students had like an owl or a cat as a familiar, which is a pet for
Maybe, but and in What We Do in the Shadows, it's Guillermo, who is a Latino guy living in Staten Island, wants to become a vampire. A lot of the series is about, he's stuck being a familiar. His dream is to become a vampire. It's very, very funny. I find it really funny, and they've been going now for 3 seasons, and it's hilarious.
I will check it out. I was looking for a new series to watch, so that's really good timing. I'll watch it and
perfect
and see what I think. When you think about improving listening through video and film, do you think that it's a better use of a learner's time to spend it watching video content or listening to audio podcasts? Which is more effective, do you think?
Yeah, that's interesting because, I mean, for me, the real core thing, like if you're going to listen to stuff in English, like it's hard. We don't always want to do it. Like we worry we're not going to understand, whatever. The important thing is to listen to something that you really like. That's like a sort of obvious kind of hack, because if you like something, then you're motivated to do it, even if it's hard, even if you don't understand.
You say it's obvious, Cara, but I've had students studying for an exam who need to improve their listening, and they just sit hour after hour doing past exam listening tests. And I say, well, yes, you need to do that, but why not just improve your listening by listening to something you enjoy? Like music, like podcasts, like TV and film, any English you can listen to is going to improve your listening over time, as well as doing the listening tests.
Okay, all right. Well, that's something to bear in mind. And then, it's interesting because podcasts are cool because they really force you to listen to listen, quite simply. If you've got no visual input, then you are working your ears more, and you really have to focus. So I think that's interesting. I mean, the other side of it is that real life listening, a lot of that is actually face to face. It is conversation. So in real life, you could argue there's like more context because you're with someone and you've got body language to help you and gesture and all these other things, and somebody who might notice that you don't understand, and there's all this like really rich context. So you could argue that video is good in that sense because then you get some visual aids to help you with listening. Although sometimes, you know, people rely too much on video and they kind of guess what must be happening based on the images, and maybe it has nothing to do with what they're actually hearing. So there's arguments for both, I think.
I agree with that. Yeah, maybe it does come down to the student's preference. If you feel more comfortable listening to podcasts because you have a very busy life and you don't have time to sit in front of a screen, then maybe podcasts are the way to go. And if you enjoy watching TV series and you spend a lot of time in front of the TV screen or computer, then maybe, the video is the way to go.
Just switch to doing it in English. Yeah, no, that's a good point. So look at what you're consuming in your language and use that as a clue. I mean, sometimes there's almost a mixture of two. Like my partner, he's French, but he listens to a lot of American comedy podcasts. So there's some big podcasters who are comedians, and they actually usually do video podcasts.
Yes.
I'm not saying that they're sort of super rich in visual clues, but at least you can like see them talking. You see their lip movements, their faces, you know, although those podcasts are definitely challenging because there's tons of like cultural references. Like I don't even understand what some of them talk about because some of them talk a lot about sport, but like US sport, I don't have a clue. Baseball, American football, I don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah, I listen to Bill Burr, and half of his podcast is that. Half of his podcast.
Oh, Bill Burr. So, yeah, actually,
American sport.
my partner's quite annoyed with Bill Burr because he does just go on about sport. But I do like his stand-up comedy because he doesn't talk so much about sport. But in his podcast,
yeah,
all sport.
Yeah, crazy. Before we go, I do want to ask you a couple of off-topic questions. Is there anything that you've changed your mind about recently, Cara?
I would say I'm kind of evolving in my thinking about what's the role of a teacher and to what extent what am I there for? Because again, with the movie club, sometimes like we would meet on Zoom once a month and I would put my students in breakout rooms and they were enjoying talking to each other so much that we had to like increase the length of the Zoom call.
I've done the same thing. I've done the same thing with my classes.
Yeah, and like I would end the breakout rooms and we'd come back all together and it would almost be a bit awkward. It's like, have I just spoiled their conversation? And now like I'm bringing it back and the focus is on me again. And I'm just trying to like get some feedback on what they were discussing and so we can all talk about it. But like, I'm like, this is not my show. This is their show. And, with movies, I don't have a background in film. I don't really know much about analyzing film, but, the stuff my students would come up with, the things that they would notice in the movies, it's just like, wow, this is your show. This is you're the ones like teaching me things. And I don't really have an advantage here as a native speaker, like, because you guys are coming up with just amazing insights.
Yeah, we learn from our students. But I think
Exactly.
I think that's one of the wonderful things about teaching. We're constantly reflecting on the best way to help our students. And that's one thing I really enjoy about it because it never really stays the same. There's always something more you can do. And now we've got AI coming into the picture. We've got to rethink how that fits into helping students. So it's constantly changing, a constantly changing landscape. It really is. One last question. If you were to tell someone something about yourself that they would find difficult to believe, what would it be?
Oh gosh, I wasn't...
You weren't expecting that one?
No, I wasn't expecting that one. I don't know. Maybe that I was a very quite shy kid. So yeah, maybe people would be surprised that I'm like an introverted person. I need a lot of alone time, but perhaps I can seem quite gregarious or talkative or whatever. I think a lot of people get confused about that.
Do you still do any classroom teaching, or are you 100% online? And if you don't do any classroom teaching, do you miss it?
Yeah, I'm 100% online now. I'm not necessarily against doing in-person teaching, but if I don't have to do it, I'm not going to do it at this stage. So It depends. I couldn't go back to doing it how I did it in the past. It would have to do something really cool, like have a movie club locally or a book club or something like that, and not kind of going in with, I've thrown away all my printed worksheets anyway, so I can't just go into a class with a worksheet and be like, oh, do this worksheet about the present perfect or whatever.
Before you go, tell us about your movie club that you mentioned earlier. What people do in your movie club and how can they sign up for it and find out more information?
Yeah, sure. So the movie club is my, I guess it's the main way I work with learners of English who also love to watch movies and who want to meet other movie lovers and who want to improve their English with movies. So it opens 3 times a year. We work together for like 3 months at a time. So we pick a theme and then we watch 3 movies that like come under that theme. So at the moment our theme is Clint Eastwood. So we just watched The Mule, which is a movie both directed by Clint Eastwood and starring Clint Eastwood.
That's a very good film.
Yeah, a couple of my students had already seen it and they were happy to see it again. And I enjoyed it as well, although it had kind of mixed reviews from the critics. That's one of the things we discussed, like why did that happen? So we kind of we take a month over each film to kind of really give ourselves the time to watch it and process it and understand it and also do some English improvement with it. So we take a week to kind of watch it and we start discussing it, and then we have a second and third week where students work with clips from the movie and they're working on their listening skills and their speaking. And I've just added a new thing kind of related to what I mentioned with Zoom, where in fact the students are going to meet twice a month for half an hour in pairs to discuss the movie by themselves. So I give them some question prompts, but otherwise they're using a scheduling tool that finds a time for them and everything. And yeah, so that's just to add extra speaking practice, extra connection with the people in the group. And we have some really cool discussions. We use WhatsApp and yeah.
Sounds like a wonderful idea. So to go and see more information, is it leolistening.com? Is that where you'd send people?
Yeah, and then there's a page about the movie club. So yeah, you can find out more about how all that works.
And how can people follow you on social media? Where are you?
Yeah, I'm not in many places. I'm on LinkedIn. So if you search for Cara Leopold, you'll find me because I think I might be the only one. I also have a YouTube channel. It's a little bit dead at the moment, but there's some good videos in the archive. So you can go and have a look at that. And then, and then on my website, you can join my newsletter, read my blog, do all those things. So
okay, well, all of the links will be in the show notes. Again, inglespodcast.com/Cara. Thank you so much, Cara. It's been a pleasure chatting to you about movies and TV series and listening. And maybe we can do this again soon.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Thank you so much, Craig.
I really enjoy talking to teachers like Cara who are specialising and focusing on particular skills so that you can improve your English. And watching films and TV series, well, I think it's a great way to improve your listening. So much fun. All the links that we spoke about during our conversation are in the show notes to this episode. Go to inglespodcast.com/Cara, C-A-R-A. And now it's your turn to practice your English. Are you watching video content as a way to study English? Who's your favourite actor or actress? And do you have any recommendations for what to watch? We'd love to hear them. Send us a voice message and let us know. We'll include your voice message in a future episode. Go to speakpipe.com, speakpipe.com/Ingles podcast and leave your voice message there. Remember, you only have 90 seconds to speak on SpeakPipe. If you prefer to contact us by email, you can reach me. I'm Craig, C-R-A-I-G, @inglespodcast.com. And if you want to send an email to my co-host Reza, write to Belfast Reza, belfastreza@gmail.com. If you're interested in buying a course to help you improve your English, why not visit the online store at store.mansioningles.net. And many thanks, as always, to everyone who is helping us by supporting this podcast on Patreon. You too can join our Patreon program for a minimum of $1.50 per month. And by doing that, you also get instant access to recent transcriptions and the great feeling that you're supporting this podcast. Go to patreon.com, patreon.com/Ingles podcast. If you enjoyed this podcast, please tell your friends so that more people can listen. Reza will be back with me next week. And until then, have a wonderful week. Thank you for listening and take care. The music in this podcast is by Pitts. The track is called See You Later.